director of School of Asian Studies of the Faculty of World Economy and World Politics of HSE National Research University. And today we have a very special guest speaker who is Dr. Yu Pun-hoi. He is a famous Hong Kong entrepreneur involved with movies, cinema, but above all with news media, real estate, IT, and various other industries. He is chairman of Nanhai Corporation and is currently employing more than 25,000 staff in China, in Hong Kong, in United States and Europe. And he is very much involved in studying and reporting the politics of People's Republic of China, China-US relations. And he is not only a keen observer of events, but also facilitator of some scientific discussions, especially at Beijing University, where he is very much involved in the Institute of New Structural Economy. Today, Dr. Yu will talk about the future of China-US relations. We all know that currently this is probably the most important international issue, as probably during the last 4 years, China-US relations has slided to probably the worst in the last 40 years. So, but with the US elections already finished, and probably in January, we will see a new president in the White House. We probably could hope for better relations and for these current tensions to be reduced. But maybe it will not happen, and maybe the current trend for decoupling will continue. So we have our audience, people who are very much interested in this question. And also, I think Dr. Yu will touch upon this famous theory by Chairman Xi Jinping, who said that we are now living in an era of unprecedented changes, changes that happen only once in 100 years. So I think we have a lot of interesting material to discuss. Dr. Yu, I think we, as we did last time, we will ask you to speak probably for how long will you, maybe 40 or 50 minutes, but we should leave some time for questions and discussions. So probably because people are eager to communicate. So if this is okay, we could probably continue, we could probably start right now. And I would like to ask the people, as usual, who will like to ask questions, please write in chat so that we can know who is asking the question and what will be the order of asking. So if this is okay, we will ask Dr. Yu Pun-hoi. Please, the floor is yours, and we are all eager to listen to your appraisal of the current and future situation. Please.
Thank you very much. I don't think it will take me 40, 50 minutes. Let's have more discussion afterwards. I think the future of China-US relations is becoming such a important subject because the two economies are really moving towards a pretty dangerous path based on what we have observed in the last 4 years. But before we move on, we should do some evaluation or definition on what is exactly going on. Some people talk about Cold War between China and USA. And to speak with you guys, Russian scholars, on another Cold War is sort of mind-boggling. The biggest challenge confronting China-US relationship is whether a Cold War is where we are heading. The idea of decoupling, I think, is only a play of words. It is just another version of a Cold War. And I don't think calling decoupling a Cold War is not that far-fetched. But did the US and the Soviet Union decouple during the Cold War? I would say even then, they were not totally decoupled. They were engaged in a competition and continuous communication were going on, and they were not really at war. And that's why I think both Cold War and decoupling are not realistic when the two countries, China and USA, are so connected, especially when we compare what happened between China, USA and the Soviet Union. But I think people should ask the question why it was a Cold War and it was not a hot war, and why this is decoupling. Why decoupling becoming the question? I think the simple reason is because China and USA are so engaged that they are becoming already becoming a couple. So decoupling becoming the question. In the last 40 years, the USA is heavily related, its prosperity is heavily related to its economic interaction with China. Businesses in the US, Wall Street or Main Street, need China to be profitable. And consumer in the US needs China to maintain its standard of living. And at the same time, and gradually, China has become a threat to their identity of being the only superpower in the world. And how could this dilemma be resolved? Should the two countries enter a war to solve such concern, or to have a Cold War just like what happened before? And both of these are not the right choices. That's why decoupling become the choice of word. However, if we look at how these two relationships, how these two countries are related, even decoupling seems not consistent with the Americans' interest of maintaining their standard of living. But the idea that China is becoming a threat to the USA, maybe we should start asking, what exactly does people mean when China is becoming a national threat to the US? There are many reasons why China-US relationship become what it is today. The biggest reason of all is the change in the relative strength between the two countries. Most people talk about economic strength, and this is one indicator which is critical, but in no way reflect the whole picture. Strategic strength or political strength is a more comprehensive reflection of the real situation between the two countries. China is not like Japan or Europe, which used to see US as the more superior power and are willing to subject its national interest to the preference of the US. Instead, China, like Russia or India, committed to have its own perspective in world politics and advance its own national interests. In view of what happened in the past 30 years, when US is the only superpower in the world, the US will not be comfortable to accommodate a rising power such as China. And military is the old measurement of strength, and economic is more important in the current form of globalization. Military, technology, political strength all rest on the foundation of economic strength. In this perspective, China is threatening the foundation of US superiority. This is, of course, dependent on how one look at economic. Now, I personally find this is a wrong perception because this is based on a zero-sum formula, just like the military and political equilibrium. But the economic do not work in such a formula. In fact, it is the other way around. Without cooperation, economic is no longer a strength. But then there is a political threat there. And the political threat is how the world, the international relationship will be constructed in a new paradigm. Now, there's a large number of newly emerged economies that seek a different role in international politics. This is very different from the Cold War time. Most of these emerging economies would benefit the way China look at international cooperation. The economic structure in the US has diminished its influence in international politics because this is no longer the time for foreign aids. This is no longer the time for military protection, just like in the Cold War. This is the time for economic cooperation, such as investment in infrastructure, shifting of manufacturing jobs, sharing of technology, open market access, etc. And China is capable of delivering these opportunities, and the US is not. China do not involve in others' internal politics, and China's investment in this emerging economy is a lot more flexible. They could be loan, they could be barter for material, or joint venture investment. All new relationship is based on such, and the replacement factor for the Americans' influence in the past is very high. So, but why is this kind of displacement or replacement factor is a threat to the US? For example, comparing with Russia and threats from other countries. The China threat to the US is imminent. The nature of such threat is more serious and complicated. Now, the American thinks China is governed by a communist party, which is fundamentally different from the US. And socialism is surely the challenge to the ideology of US. Now, I personally do not see this as a problem. And to replace the US as the largest economy in the world, I think is really the core of such threat instead of the Communist Party, instead of socialism. And because when you look at it from, for example, from Vietnam, Vietnam is also governed by a communist party, which is also propagate a socialist ideology, but the US do not seem to have to see it as a threat. And more important, China has been trading and engaging with the US for the past 50 years. The difference of the two systems do not seem to be a problem in the past. Why is it a problem today? So I think the real problem is because of the political and the economic threat. When we talk about the threat China is sort of imposing upon the Americans as what they think, we might need to step back and ask, what exactly is the nature of China-US relationship? Now we must remember, since the very beginning, China-US relationship is not based on cultural or historical. It has always been based on mutual necessity or mutual interest. And the US is an offshoot of European civilization. Its history was tangled with Europe. The relationship between the Soviet Union and the US was an evolution from, or sort of a derivative from the European civilization. Any animosity between the two countries was very deep rooted in history. China and US relationship is not. China and US or Europe never met before the beginning of the 19th century or at the end of this 18th century. And the relationship between China and the US and Europe are really entangled together because of the colonial expansion by Europe. So China and US definitely are not that closely related until after the Second World War or during the Second World War. So I think because of the nature of China-US relationship, and it is based on mutual interest, if there is any changes to this relationship today, somebody who are the benefactor of this relationship today would need to sacrifice what they have been benefiting in the past. So I think the crucial issue is if we understand the nature of the China-US relationship and how its mutual interests connected the two, then we will be easy to talk about how the future of this relationship evolve. When we say mutual benefit between China and US, let's ask what kind of benefit are we talking about between China and US? Clearly, geopolitics and trade are the two facets of the relationship between China and USA, and especially related to the benefit the Americans enjoy through its relationship with China. Let's look back in the Second World War. The American was start relating to China only when the American enters the Pacific War. And it was the Pacific War and the containment of Japan at that time how the relationship between China and USA build their relationship. And later on, how to contain the Soviet Union was also the main factor between China and USA when Nixon visited China in 1972. Only after the 80s, when China started the opening up policy, and the relationship between China and USA evolved into trade and economic, and later on, including investments. When we look back in the 70s and early 80s, the containment of the Soviet Union needs the support of China. And later, as a strong junior partner, China could provide counterweight to Japan, to Vietnam, and later on with Russia. Since the late 80s and early 90s, the added benefit for the Americans to have a relationship with China was the supply of cheap labor to US manufacturing. The increasing investment in US Treasury product, the support of US financialization process, and the expansion of the Wall Street later on also become a very important benefit Americans enjoy with its relationship with China. We must remember all this enhanced US standard of living in the 90s and the first 10 years of this new century. Back to the beginning of this new century, the war on terror during the Bush Jr. presidency delayed the US strategy to contain China, and the financial crisis of 2008 delayed such containment strategy further. The US needs China on its war on terror, including the help from Pakistan and the encirclement of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, you must remember, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld are both proponents for a containment strategy on China, okay? And only because of the war on terror that such strategy was delayed. And the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008 surely needs the Chinese to provide stimulus and growth to the world economy. That was how the Chinese provided benefit at that time. Now, the total trade of goods between China and USA peaked at $660 billion in 2018. And 2019, it dropped about 100 billion because of the trade war. The idea that trade deficit is not good and US should use trade policy or trade war to ratify it, I'm sure everybody understands, is an illusion. The only way to change the trade balance is for the US to be competitive in its export. Only by then, one could adjust its trade policy to promote a trade objective that is beneficial to the American economy. But all of that are negatively affected when domestic politics become a part of the China-US relationship. And before that happened, the relationship between China and USA was good. But today, somebody has constructed a new narrative that China is not being fair and China is stealing intellectual property from American company, infringement of human rights, and USA needs to contain the Chinese expansionists and the Chinese bully in the South China Sea. And they were doing it not just for the US, it is also for the benefit of the world. This is a new narrative that the American has been propagating in the last 4 years, and actually been propagating a little bit longer than that, but most importantly, most seriously in the last 4 years with the Trump administration. When such narrative become the mainstream, the nature of China-US relationship changes drastically. But why is this narrative could be established quickly and so easily gain traction? Now, it is true that China has a very different political system. The size of the Chinese economy has also grown so big that such new narrative create an image that China is threatening the US way of life, and its economic growth has been so phenomenal that this relative change of size become noticeable. So when these two strange appearance to the Americans appear, it sounds alarming for a lot of Americans. That's why this narrative gains traction. So if that's the case, if China is a democratic system like Taiwan, and will China-US relationship evolve differently? And the answer is clearly no. Just look at Russia and Saudi Arabia for that sake. Russia is a democratic electoral system, and its relationship with the US is confrontational. But Saudi Arabia is definitely dictatorial, and its relationship with the US is very cordial. And in fact, they are allies. But that's why anyone believes China-US relationship could be different if China has a similar system like the US. You must remember during the war on terror, when the Americans want to invade Iraq, the Europeans refused to follow through, and the US called Europe the old Europe, including France and Germany. And when there's a need for domestic politics, Donald Trump did not spare Europe, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Korea with its trade war. So I think the idea that the political system between China and US caused the problem between China and US is totally untrue. And to put this narrative, a new narrative on the table, is easier for the Americans to use China as a scapegoat for what's happening in the US. The benefit equation that's been happening between China and US in the last 50 years and is no longer the same anymore, because the benefit equation is now becoming a cost and benefit equilibrium. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that it was a one-sided relationship, politically speaking, for the US in the last 40, 50 years, because of geopolitics, because of trade. But today, a new factor, and which is a cost, has become pretty dominant. That's why the benefit equation is now becoming a cost and benefit equilibrium. Is the cost exceed benefit today? That's why the relationship changed color. And if that's the case, could the new equilibrium be adjusted? During the past, there's no cost to the US to use China as a part of its grand strategy in geopolitics, and its trade with China is also beneficial to the US. But today, the cost is rising. And of course, we should also note, if it's rising, is it true that's the case? Now, we can go back and look at what Obama said with his first State of the Union address. Even for a president like Obama, not totally the same as Donald Trump, in his first State of Union address, he reminded everyone, even at that time, that the US will not be a global power number 2. And the reason he said that is because at that time, people start worrying that the US will become global power number 2, implying that China become global power number 1. And why is this the case? I think the problem between China and US is this is the root problem, the root cause for the change of its relationship. Now, I'm sure you guys are all intellectually capable and intelligent person. The idea of being number one and being number two is totally psychological. But psychological could be big or could be small, depends who you are. Japan became the number two, replacing a lot of European power after the Second World War. In fact, US surpassed all European powers in the early 20th century. It took many decades before the British get used to it. Japan's number two position was replaced by China about 10 years ago. And it took Japan some time to get used to it. But to replace the number two is one thing. To replace the number one is another thing. So I think at the moment, the Americans do take that very seriously. But if we look at it that way, then we have to ask, what is the cost if US wants to change this equation, this equilibrium? What does it take to do so? And how will it cost the US? And who will bear such costs? Now, this has become a new problem for US politicians, which is how to evaluate the cost and benefit to the relationship today. Now, as I said earlier, the relationship between China and US has been beneficial to the US. Reason, because there's a lot of businesses benefited from it. In geopolitics sense, in the good old day, it helps the US to balance its power with the Soviet Union. And later on, they think China is not a threat. It could be a stabilizing power. And China and US keep a pretty good relationship in the 90s and the first 10 years of this century because of the war on terror. But if we started to change this formula, if America want to change its relationship with China, it would definitely require some sacrifice. And because it was engaged with China for so long already, who will bear this sacrifice? Businesses, for example. The trade war between China and the USA in the last 2 years, recently, there's a lot of American companies, including IBM, including Walmart and all that, start suing the US government for this trade war and the increase of tax on the import from China. And when we do that, we can understand that the problem, how the problem evolved. And the business definitely do not want to bear the sacrifice. The people of the USA will also bear the cost of changing the equilibrium, because if US and China decouple, if the trade stopped, I'm very sure the $600 billion goods that's traded between China and USA, it will, if they stop, it will cost the American consumer a lot. And so when we look at that, if we go deeper, let's use a few other examples. Why, for example, Yahoo is a company I think a lot of you knows also. The company is no longer the same as 20 years ago already. The only asset Yahoo has, the only valuable asset Yahoo has when they were selling itself to, I think it's AOL or AT&T, the remaining asset they have is the shares they have on Alibaba. When we look at Apple, almost all manufacturing Apple is doing is in China. If the trade between China and USA decouple or stopped, how would that happen? At one time, I was told more than 50 to 60% of Walmart's product are purchased from China. In fact, if you look back on Alan Greenspan's book about 12, 13 years ago, it talks about how the American standard of living in the 90s and the first 10 years of this new century, that improved so much because companies like Walmart purchase a lot of product from China. I'm sure when we look at the Wall Street, when we look at the Treasury, the 1.1 trillion that China purchased the Treasury bond from the US. If economic decoupling happen, if economic sanction work, then the cost to the American business, both in the Wall Street and Main Street, are they prepared to take that sacrifice? Will any politician dare to antagonize these businesses and financial establishment? Will the US consumer bear the largest part of the cost for any economic decoupling, since their daily necessity will cost a lot more? Now, not to mention how will such decoupling destabilize the US economy and how much will it hurt its currency? A lot of people say that, oh, China will also hurt on that. Yes, it is true. But we look at two figures. Number one, China's trade in the last 1 year, I think in the last 6-7 months, the ASEAN country become the largest trading partner of China. USA is only the number 3 with trade relationship with China. I think European Union is the second one. And most important of all, trade as a percentage of China GDP, it was peak at 2006 when trade represent about 65% of China's GDP. But today or last year, this number went down to 35%. And this percentage is continuously moving down. What it really means is that China's reliance on trade has dramatically reduced in the last 15 years. Most important of all is China's trade is no longer as the surplus-driven kind of trade about 10 years ago. China's import has rising faster than its export in the last few years. Xi Jinping was saying recently that China will grow its economy with a twin cycle logic. One is based on domestic consumption, and the second is based on external consumption, which is basically export. So this twin cycle are the new economic structure that China intends to build. Why that could happen is because the local services sector, the local consumption has risen significantly over the last few years. And it is the policy of China to replace that, to replace its export-driven economy with a much more local consumption economy. That's why even with the 35% we have in 2019, the 25% as a percent of trade as a percentage of the GDP, even with that, a higher percentage of that is the percentage of its related to export will also be going down. So import will be a lot more important. So economic decoupling in this sense, it really doesn't work, okay? When we look at the second part of this cost that the American wants, if they want to decouple with China, and how does it work? And any decoupling will involve a political containment that the American needs to impose on China. It will need a lot of other countries to work together with America in order to contain China. But does it look like this will happen? Recently, you can see the RCEP, the regional free trade agreement between the ASEAN country and Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, China was signed. And this RCEP agreement clearly tells you, and the containment strategy the Americans want is a lot more complicated than the America they want to contain China. Then you have to ask, will countries that are closely associated with the USA, including Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Japan, Korea, will they participate in such a containment? And Australia recently has a pretty big diplomatic argument with China. And the Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, is also talking about whether this is something he is evaluating whether he should deepen the fight between Australia and China diplomatically. I'm sure you understand, Morrison is a very hawkish person when he became the Prime Minister of Australia. Even him, I don't think, clearly, I don't think he intends to intensify the fight between China and Australia. And look at the case of Russia, for example. And I'm pretty sure Russia and country like that will not be participating in a containment strategy. Now, China is responsible for more than 12.5% of world trade. US is about 1% behind China at 11.5%. And China is the largest trading partner to the ASEAN, to Japan, and a lot of other countries also. Will a political containment strategy suggested by the US works in such a situation? I honestly don't think so. The last element is if US try to contain China, the last element is war. The last two they could have is war. But war, I mean, if it happened, if it's effective in changing the equation, and the cost will be tremendous. Of course, the number one cause for a war between China and US, initiated by the US, is if the US fail to win a war. I'm not saying that China will win a war. I'm just saying US fail to win a war, okay? And the number two risk for the American is how much does it cost for the Americans to have a war with China? And the number three cause is will the politician hold on to their power? I mean, the electorate in the US, will they be still supportive to this politician in a war with China? I think when we talk about decoupling, why is the concept of decoupling become so fashionable? I think exactly it's because they don't want to talk about a war. And decoupling is a more digestible idea than war. It is easier for people to imagine decoupling than to imagine to have a war with China. I think I'm just like the Singapore Prime Minister said a couple of weeks ago, and he was asked in a conference that how will the Singaporean choose between China and USA? The Prime Minister said very clearly he doesn't think Singapore or other ASEAN country or even Europe will take side or will participate in a containment strategy by the US on China. In the case of Germany, I'm pretty sure you understand Germany and China has a very strong economic relationship. China benefit quite a lot by buying a lot of German manufactured goods. Recently, I saw some statistic that Mercedes-Benz is one company that benefited a lot with the recent revival of the Chinese economy. It basically helped Mercedes-Benz and also Volkswagen in maintaining its sales in this terrible year of COVID. The Australia is another testing case, which I said earlier. And let's see in the next few weeks, how will the current dispute between China and Australia turns out? I think both sides would prefer to have a more stable relationship. I think the reason why it's so difficult to decouple with China, and it will also be reflective on how the future of China-US relationship goes, is if anybody is suggesting a decoupling or a Cold War, I'm sorry, this is too late, okay? And the US is no longer the admirable partner in the world, or it is a leader that deserves genuine respect because its relationship with so many countries are ruined, it, not only because of Trump, but also because the war in the Middle East and all that. And there's a lot of countries are concerned on how the US will interfere in the internal politics. Most important of all, both domestically and in international politics, there's not that many justifiable reasons to contain China. The cost and benefit formula will kick in again. All this accusation of human rights, stolen of intellectual property, unfair trade practices, intimidation of neighboring country, territorial claim, and all that, I honestly think they are groundless accusation. Is only a tool that shift the domestic problem to the outside. And as far as the future between China and the US is concerned, the key word is how to reach a compromise between these two conflicting positions, the cost and the benefit part. Now, I'm sure you understand the US is indulged in a very serious populism kind of politics. And I personally think if populism subsides and reason stay at the right place, then the problem between China and US will be better. Now, I can give you one small example. In China, there's what we call a Woojin Index. Woojin is a small city in the eastern part of China, which manufacture a lot of small goods. Why we call that a Woojin Index? Because whenever the American election is there, the number of product that Woojin produce for America politics is always an indication who will win the election. Now, in the past year or so, of course, the Woojin Index this time fails because the Trump campaign purchased a lot more material from Woojin than the Biden campaign. But end up in the past, we would say that because the Trump purchased more stuff from China on political campaign, then they will win. But this time it's the other way around. Why is this indicative? For somebody like Trump and their campaign, even them, they purchase almost all of their campaign materials from China. So there is a very strong trade relationship needs there. Okay. Now I would see the China-US relationship will continue to be unstable and volatile for quite a while. I think two factors will dictate the degree of volatility. One is the continuous deterioration of the US economy and the rise of populism in US politics. The second is the growth in size of the Chinese economy and its military strength. Now, people should really focus on one thing. The continuous deterioration of the US economic strength is the true reason of US insecurity. Now, I'm sure this is common knowledge among the elite in Washington, but it is politically incorrect to blame it on US politics and policy. In fact, this is a structural issue with the American system. Without strong public or business opinion support on the reform of such structural issue, no real changes could happen in the US. The US politician could only export its economic problem through printing of US dollar and its political problem through blaming China or some other country like Russia. Okay, these are both convenient and easy to do, and the populism is the best tool to do so. How long will this volatility remain between China and US? I have a guess. When the Chinese economy is 125% of the US economy, which I believe quite likely to happen around 2030 to 2035, or when the RMB is more than 20% of world reserve currency, which at the moment is only 2.5%. And the dollar index, if it goes down all the way below 80 for quite a while, today it just went down below 91. Now, if the US dollar lost its dominance in world currency market, it will be very important for the American politician to focus on its own economic management, then the vanity of being the only superpower in the world. Now, maybe by that time, it will become more reasonable. It will come to sense on how the world evolves. Maybe by that time, the world will become a lot more peaceful. Now, that's how I'm not that optimistic about the immediate future between China and USA, even with the Biden administration, because it has become a structural issue in American politics that exporting its problem, shifting its burden to an outside power, and this will continue to be the case. And when that still happens, the China-US relationship will not be any better than today. Maybe it will be in a different form, but this will continue to be the key feature between China and US relationship. I think that I will end my talk here, and we can move into a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu. I think that it was very concise, clear, and strong statement. And I think that we all probably there will be some questions, but I would like, before we go to the Q&A session, the chairman of our Chinese seminar, Professor Alexander Lukin, has joined us. Professor Lukin, do you want to say a couple of comments before we go to the questions and answers? Professor Lukin? Okay, maybe he will speak later. Then now I can open the questions and answers session. Please write your name in the chat so that I can give you the floor. And I would like to ask Dr. Trush, Sergei Trush, who will ask the first question. Okay, Sergei, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Yu Pun-hoi, for really very concise and systematic perspective on the U.S.-China current and future relations. You become the very interesting and thought-provoking guest of our seminar. This is the second meeting we had within a short period of time. You were speaking previously on the Hong Kong issues, and that was very thought-provoking too. Well, I will not be in capacity to judge the full array of very interesting thoughts and perspectives on US-China decoupling you've mentioned here. I would probably try to divert your interest and probably ask the question from the internal part of the US-China and the Russia role situation in that. So as you quite correctly mentioned in your talk, there is a lot of internally driven questions, internally driven motives of the current state of US-China relations development are built in internal logics and internal motives of two big and very complicated societies, the Chinese and the American. You were quite correctly pointing out the populist motivations of US policy to China, especially during the Trump period and previously. You the same correctly mentioned the role of internal consumption growing inside China as a very solid future motive for reshaping of US-China relationships and the Chinese place in the world. Let me ask you the following. We are living in the year of 2020, and it is already about 8 years of Xi Jinping being the first leader of China. So, judging by the situation in United States, Russia, China, well, as speaking to the United States, it was quite a turbulent period in internal processes in the United States, and the recent election was vividly showing to what extent the United States is divided, to what extent the very complicated motivations in election campaign were taking role, and to what extent, well, to quite weird forms of political debate we are witnessing in the United States now. So just finishing with the States, my personal feeling is that, well, we are still not in the end game of this weird period in the States history. And I'm pretty much afraid of the possible foreign policy outcomes of that, especially in Iran or somewhere else. So my feeling to this point is I'm not quite sure that the game is quite over with Trump presidency now. Speaking to Russia, well, we are also living in a quite difficult period of post-communist development, and probably we are...
I'm sorry, Sergey, because we have a lot of other people who would like to ask questions. Can I ask you?
I'm summing up, but still I want to make a little bit comparison with my question. So we are also in pretty difficult turbulence. We are facing the clash of ideologies inside Russia. We have the Valdai Club ideology. We have the Navalny ideology. All these serious processes are also taking shape in our internal development, and they are quite complicated and quite based on our real life. But if to speak about China from this period of time, if we are judging by the China political scientists' assessment what's going on there, or the main tendency is not such big turbulence, pretty much stable political scene, well, with the growing role of the paramount leader, with the well, his growing influence in administrative system, in military system, in ideology. So this, as we see the picture being assessed from the China political thinkers, At the same time, there is understanding and there is, let's say, the Western view of Chinese development, internally political, that is assessing that China was not so much politically internally stable during that period. So we know that Xi Jinping was coming to power, and then was the serious corruption and politically scandals and removing of the Zhou Junkang, the Genfa, the whole Genfa apparatus was being reshuffled. The rectification campaign that is widely assessed in the Western world not as a anti-corruption campaign, but the campaign of the competition between various factions and various clans inside China bureaucracy. So let me ask you, as not a propagandist, but as a political thinker and the person who are being introduced as pretty much involved and facilitating the Chinese internal political process. To what extent the Chinese bureaucracy and political class is the same as it being viewed through Chinese propagandistic image of the world? It is quite reasonable, but at the same time, we do understand that the system is very complex. It has various factions of bureaucracies. It has various views of China future, China place in the world. What is your understanding of that? What is your reading of Chinese bureaucratic stability and a division of interest inside that?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, but I'm sorry. I would especially would like to ask all the participants to to pay attention to the timing. And before Dr. Yu will answer your question, I would like still to ask our chairman of our Chinese seminars, Professor Lukin, because he, like several minutes ago, I asked him to make his comments, but he was not able to open his mic. So Professor Lukin, please, maybe you should provide your comments.
Shall I say it now and then?
Yes, now.
No, I have a relatively short question. Well, Mr. Yu said that, he put forward this idea, which I heard many times and sometimes also claim the same thing, that the political system in China does not, has nothing to do with the clash between the United States and China. But I think it's true only partially, because he mentioned Vietnam as another example. But and this is true in a way, because Vietnam is a good example, but it's a much smaller country. There is another theory, though, there is a theory which compares the current change, if it's going to happen, the change of world leader, world number one power, with the change between the United States and Britain that took place after the Second World War. And if we compare these two, we can say that the British Empire lost its position, but first, the political system was relatively similar to the United States, or values, you can call it, were relatively same or similar. And secondly, Britain continued to be an ally of the United States. So in case of China, Chinese political system is very different from that of the United States and is seen as dangerous from the United States. Whether it's communism or not, it's another question, but it's certainly very different. And I would say from the American and Western generally point of view is rather unpredictable. So even if you are saying that, say, businessmen of the United States and the West in general are going to lose quite a lot of money because of the decoupling, they also may think that if China dominates, they're going to lose much more, or also quite a lot, not in terms of money, but in terms of predictability of the world kind of legal system, independence of various courts, including international courts like arbitrage and things like that. I think this is a factor. And if you just tell Americans that you strange people, you should not do it because you are going to lose a lot of money. This is, of course, in a way, a very Marxist approach, because Marxism comes from the basis of the Marxist idea is that economy is the basis of everything. But we also know, for example, that before the Second World War, Britain and Germany were the major trade partners of each other, and they did not prevent them from beginning a war. So I think we should maybe take into consideration more factors, including those ideological, legal, and systemic factors, not just economic factors. So that's what I was going to ask, and what I wonder what Dr. Yu thinks about it. By the way, Dr. Yu, I think, is a doctor of Beijing University, where I also spent some time. So we can be called Xiao Yu in a way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Lukin. Dr. Yu, I would try to ensure that other questions will be shorter, but please answer the questions posed by the first two speakers, Trush, Dr. Trush and Professor Lukin. Please.
I like to look at it this way. The internal politics in China is a lot more stable today because of the successful economic development. I think this is the fundamental of why China's internal politics are a lot more stable. When you said about anti-corruption at the beginning of Xi Jinping's time, I would look at the other way. I would say, even if such a strong political changes and such a serious anti-corruption crackdown in China, even at that time, the political situation and the system are very stable. So if somebody say, why is it very stable? I would say it's because most of the people are reacting to the anti-corruption in a very calm and positive manner. And there's no negative factor that will change the economic dynamic in China at that time. And that's why Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign was very successful. And it was also consistent with what the general public are expecting from a new leader. And Xi Jinping delivered that. And that's why the political instability, as some people outside of China talk about, never really happened. I think the reason why the American situation are very confrontational now, I honestly think is also because of the economic situation in the USA. Now, I'm sure when we talk about the rise of Trump 4 years ago, everybody understands he won the election because he got the support of the white male and even female also that are not in the suburban, and which are the core of the manufacturing base in the past. But I'm sure if you look at the COVID situation this year, the American manufacturing base has almost disappeared. They can't even produce machine for ventilate for breathing, and they cannot even manufacturing masks. The export of China has risen so much this year because a lot of them went to the USA. 3M manufactured the N95, but most of the manufacturing are done in China. So when we look at these two things, it happened in 4 years ago, the rise of Trump, and what happened this year, you will understand the manufacturing base of USA has almost disappeared during the financialization of the US economy in the last 30 to 40 years. So when we look at it, then we could understand the manufacturing base creates jobs and creates better paid jobs. So when we look at that, then the stability in politics could be described. Now, I heard about Putin's plan to make to revitalize, put it that way, the job situation in the economic situation in Russia, and try to become the number 5 in the world economy. The reason why he said that, and he's been saying that in the last few years, is that a lot of people now come to really recognize that employment and income are a lot more important than purely a GDP number. I heard the Biden-Harris interview this morning in CNN and Hong Kong Time. And clearly, the Biden and Harris new administration are focusing on jobs creation and are focusing on the income for workers, because this is the fundamental of why populism arises in the USA. Now, I look at it this way. The reason China internal politics are a lot more stable than outside people could imagine, the kind of support that the general public are given to the leadership today is because China has a very systemic commitment to manufacturing. Now, even as today, instead of moving aggressive in financial services, China has a very stringent policy in making sure the financial sector in China will not destabilize the manufacturing sector and the services sector. In fact, the China Manufacturing 2025 and the China economic projection for the next 15 years to 2035 are all very much focused on technology, innovation, manufacturing, and high value added services. Now, if we look at that, I think we must come to a reckoning that when we talk about economic in the past, we are not specific enough. Because if economic development do not support the improvement of standard of living or livelihood of the general public, it will not be a stabilizing factor. The GDP could go up very fast. I mean, if you heard my talk a couple months ago on Hong Kong, the economic situation in Hong Kong in terms of GDP, in terms of GDP per capita is very high. It's higher than Germany. But the income structure in Hong Kong is very bad comparing with Germany. And that's why the political instability becoming the theme in the last couple of years. What I said last time is Hong Kong in the last 30 years, wages of the bottom 1 million workers have only increased about 180%, but housing has improved 10 times. GDP per capita is about 10 times higher. So when we look at that, we will understand better the economic factor is very important. Now, the internal politics in China is stable, is because of that. Of course, it's not just of that. Now, I'm sure you heard about the fifth modernization of China, which is basically the modernization of its governance systems. And to improve governance is a very important factor. Now, the West has been emphasizing democracy, has emphasizing on freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and all that. These are important. But if such elements are not supported by good governance, governance that can produce goods, governance that could produce wealth, that could provide housing and adequate living standard for the people, and everything else is meaningless. So what we are saying is that the internal politics in China is stable is because the economic development part is very aggressive and has a lot of dynamic energy there. And at the same time, the government has focused a lot on governance. Now, if you look back on the COVID today, how come China suffered the most at the beginning and it could revive the most afterward in such a short period of time? Is because its governance, both nationally and provincially, are very, very robust. So I think we must look at that in terms of internal politics. If internal politics is divisional and confrontational, I think politics plays a very important factor. But I also quite agree, it is not economic determinism. It is also requires a lot of work in the system, in the governance of the country, in every facet of the system. Now, with that, I will move on to the second question by Professor Lukin. I think you are right that economic could not explain everything. Now, we also understand that. But I think if we don't have a sound economic base, we don't have a very dynamic economic development agenda, it will become very difficult for politics and other things to play, to build up on that. So I think the problem between China and USA is economic, is an export of its internal economic problem to the outside world. But I'm also agreeable that because there's so much lack of understanding between China and USA, like I said earlier, the two countries do not relate to each other in history, in culture, and all that until actually around 70, 80 years ago during the Pacific War. Before that, the European and the Americans do not look at China as a meaningful partner in any way, and they were required to understand it. They don't. But after the Second World War, only when China became an important factor for the USA in its counterbalance with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, that the Americans start trying to understand China. But I don't think that's enough, because the last 40 years in its economic interaction, I don't think the Americans understand how China works, because the only thing they know is, oh, China is turning into a capitalist society. Oh, no, worse. It's becoming a state capitalist society. I don't think in any way in the past 40 years, they try to understand China in the way it is. They don't want to recognize that China was socialism. They don't want to understand China is in any way different from the USA. But I think recently they start to understand. They started to awaken to the idea they need to understand China. Now, because of this lack of understanding, what China has been doing is, and also because of prejudice in the USA, and it is now trying to understand USA, and it started with a prejudice, which is China is definitely an evil before we can understand it as a good a participant in world politics. Now, because other than that, I mean, if we look at, I like to put it this way. In the West, the way they look at politics is a very much a linear way to look at things. They will look at it from good or bad, right or wrong. me and you, instead of looking at it as what is not, can we look at it from some other angle? Instead of good or bad, can we look at it from an angle of, oh, they are different. They are both good, or they are both bad, or all three of them are good. Okay. Now, I think this is the biggest problem. You can look back on the US and Soviet relationship, okay? And they back in the 50s and 60s. And why the US and China, they could fight a war together during the Second World War? And then why does it turn into such a Cold War, okay, later? I think there's a lot of things other than what we said on the face. And clearly, China, USA and Soviet Union at that time, they don't, other than a lot of the proxy war, okay, they don't have trade, they don't have other things together. So why are they competing on Sputnik, for example? Why do we want to compete on that? Okay, I mean, if you go up to the moon, good. We should learn from you, and then we do it another time, and we can work together on that. So I think we must not eliminate the risk of being prejudiced, being arrogant, and being the lack of interest in understanding the other side. And the worst part of that is we look at it only from a linear thinking, which is good and bad, okay, right or wrong. Because when you do that, you always will say, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm good, you are bad. That's always the result, okay? So I would suggest if we look at the China-US situation, I quite agree, we cannot just look at economic. But I would say when we look at system, ideology, don't just look at it as different, but don't just look at it from a good or bad. We should also look at it, they could be different. So that's how I would address that issue.
Okay, thank you very much. I counted that there are another 6 questions, but my proposal is that probably we should ask people to ask quickly and ask Dr. Yu to also answer quickly, because we usually have students, they could not stay for a longer period of time. I think that we should ask Mr. Makarenko, who sent 3 questions, but maybe you will choose one of them.
Yes, of course. So thank you very much. I thank you, Professor, for your delivered understanding of the situation. It's very interesting. And I think we can agree that no China or Russia have nothing to blame themselves for the spoiled relations with America. The fault on the American side completely, I think, because of American very
okay, what is your question? What is your question?
It's okay. Only
we do not need presentation, but just quick question.
Is it possible to leave China or Russia? Can we live without American participating in our successes? If we put aside war, like a possible or very unfortunate development, can we live without America now if they will break relations with us like Trump promised, but hasn't done?
Clear. Dr. Yu, please.
I first of all, I don't think that is a good situation that we will leave the America, and but if the American want to decouple from China or Russia, I don't think the rest of the world will die. I think we will continue to adjust. And I mean, look at what happened to Russia in the last 6-7 years. And when the Americans sanctioned the Russia very aggressively, okay? But I think in the war between China and US, a trade war in the last couple of years, and clearly China did not hurt a bit, okay? And I would strongly suggest we should resolve our differences through a lot more understanding, dialogue, communication, and goodwill. But we are not going to compromise our dignity, our national interest in order just to meet the requirement of the USA. But I would strongly suggest we should try to work it out. but at the same time, be prepared. And if it comes to that, we will be able to stand on our own and then create a market, create an economic cooperation that different countries could work together. And nobody is dispensable, okay? Nobody is indispensable. Anybody, even China, okay, can be kicked out of the international arena. So I would strongly suggest both Russia and China should work together and work with the American and the European as much as possible, as hard as possible, as genuine as possible, but we should stay fast on our own principle and also in our own national interest, okay? Should be defined broadly, not narrowly. That's how we see it.
Okay, next question comes from a student, Huang Shi. 黄同学，你可以提问题。Okay.
Hello. 你好。My question is the change of Trump administration's cognition and policy towards China is long-term and strategic. The United States clearly defines China as a strategic competitor, and its China policy is becoming more and more tough. And China's policy response will further strengthen the United States side's new understanding of China. So I want to know what is the reason behind this. And I also have some my opinion I want to discuss with you.
I think I get the question, which is that why China is so tough in reacting to the USA. Is that the question, right?
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. Honestly, I don't think China is being tough at all. I think China is being responsive. What it means is that when Americans do something, you can choose two ways. One is to respond. One is not to respond. In the situation of a trade war, if you don't respond, you will send a terrible message to America that they could do more without drawing the attention or response from China. It will let America to continue to tough and ruin the situation. But if the Chinese have a corresponding or proportionate response, okay, that's what the Chinese been doing in the last 2-3 years. It will tell the Americans, yes, we are prepared to talk, but I don't think it is a good idea for you to escalate the conflict. So I think I don't think the China are reactionary in the sense that we are only reacting to your sanction and or increase in tariff. We are also communicating with you through our response. So that's why China has always been a tit for tat kind of response, but always do it in afterward and also following the action by the Americans. And as far as the message is concerned, China has always been saying we are prepared to talk, we are prepared to trade. And in fact, at the end of the trade war, the trade agreement, China has been very accommodating. Now, if you look back on Trump's visit to China, I think in 2017, okay, or 2018, the beginning, to Beijing, Xi Jinping has been very accommodating. In fact, most of the terms that China agreed in the trade agreement last year was originally proposed in 2018. So at the end of the day, the trade war was settled on that. So I wouldn't say China responded to the American trade war aggressively. I think they're communicating with them through a proportional response only. That's how I see it. I don't support China react aggressively, okay, in any way, okay? I think China should be very calm and react proportionally. That's how I see it.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. I will read out another question posted by Vladimir Skosarev. He asks two questions. Can American pressure influence the achievement of China's goal of building a strong socialist modernized country by 2049, by the anniversary of People's Republic of China? And another question, is there a possibility that China will reduce its foreign engagement in Belt and Road Initiative and in Africa because of American pressure?
I don't think the American in any way could stop the China's growth trajectory towards 2049. I think the American could disturb that. I think we talk about that political containment. We talk about economic decoupling. I talk about war. I think there is definitely the possibility. The single superpower in the world today with strong military capability, with the strength of the US dollar, the dominance of the US dollar could affect China's road towards 2049. But I don't think they can turn it back. And I don't think the China is too weak to resist such attempt by the Americans. So I don't see that happening, okay? And the second question is, will China disengage from the rest of the world because of American pressure? I don't see that possibility whatsoever. I think the China is too engaged with the entire world. China has significant trade activities with the entire world, outside of the USA, outside of Europe, because Europe and the USA only occupies maybe about 20-something% of China's external trade activities. 70-80% of China's external economic activities are related to the rest of the world, with Russia, Central Asia, and Africa, Latin America. So I don't see that possible. As regard to Belt and Road, I honestly, I will put it in the same category. I don't see how the American in any way or shape or form that could disturb that, that program.
Okay, we have another question from Alexei Dertyev. Alexei, could you ask your question yourself? Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the surname once again?
Alexei Dertyev. Alexei Dertyev. Okay, I will do it for you. So the question is, will the upcoming 14th five-year plan, you know, there are five-year plans, will this five-year plan change the Chinese approach on high-tech industry development in the focus of the US-China trade war? I don't quite understand.
Yes, the question is because there was a recently ruling party plenum communique, and you may know the plan Made in China 2025, and it wasn't mentioned in this plan. So I'm asking whether this kind of approach, policy approach on high technology will be reworked, or the Communist Party will create a new kind of approach on dealing with technological independence in China.
You mean that the Chinese government has scrapped this Made in China 2025 because of American pressure?
I mean, what will be the future of China's policy on high tech in the next five-year plan?
I think the high tech program are the core of the 14th five-year plan. In fact, the 2035 projection are also anchor on the technology, the innovation and technology. And so I don't think the 2025 China manufacturing plan was scrapped in any way. No, the 14th five-year plan actually consolidate that and focus them very heavily on that. If you read through the 14th five-year plan, this is the anchor, okay, of the entire economic program in the plenum just completed recently. And I think you should look carefully and read through the line that China look at technology and innovation in different perspective. Technology is one thing. Innovation could also involve services and doesn't have to be technology related. It could be policy related. It could be methodology related. So I think there's a lot of change in there. But technology and innovation are definitely the key word for the next 5 years, and in fact for the next 15 years to 2035. This is how I see it.
Okay, the next question is from Francesca Cuozo. I think, judging from the name, she's Italian student. Okay, Francesca, the floor is yours.
Yes, hi, thank you for your impressive speech. So as I studied in my bachelor thesis, one of the main problems for China is their soft power. And in this so-called Cold War, what role will soft power play between China and America? Thank you.
Let me answer it this way. Soft power doesn't come through a simple painting or a simple antique, a simple song, okay? Soft power will only come after you have solid power. And I think, but of course, when you have solid power, doesn't mean you can be barbaric, you can be bully, and then you have soft power, no. But without the hard power, or what the American call, I would like to use a solid power, and it is very important. Your soft power must be built on that. Now, when we talk about soft power, let's look at Japan, for example. Okay, during the Second World War, after the Second World War, nobody cares about the Japanese soft power, but the Japanese has always been so artistic. The way they perform the daily life has always been like that for many years. Nobody noticed that. But when they become an economic superpower, and then when their product becoming very nice, okay, the electronic product by Sony, by Panasonic and all that, then everybody suddenly noticed, oh, gee, the Japanese are so smart. And then they would say the art, the lifestyle and all that are very impressive. I'm pretty sure China has the soft power that we commonly know today, okay? And but I think it would take a little bit of time for people start to look at China in a rational, in a reasonable way. Then people will know how to appreciate it. I mean, look at it this way. And the opera in Italy and the opera in China, okay? Honestly, I'm pretty sure a lot of foreigners don't quite understand what the Chinese opera looks like. They don't know how they sing. But I can tell you, I don't understand Italian opera also. But I love it, okay? So why? I think it will take a little bit of time when your hard power is established, and then you continue to go to that. One interesting thing I can explain to you. I mean, you guys know that I'm a cinema operator also in China. My cinemas in Malaysia needs to continue to shut down, but my cinema in China start open in September already. Why? Because in Malaysia, most of the films I can broadcast, I can show are Hollywood film or film from outside. Malaysia doesn't really have a film industry on its own. But in China, we don't need the American films. We have our own film industry. Like India, we don't need the American film because The American film cannot be shown because the European, the American cinema market are shut down. So all the major blockbusters do not show themselves. The James Bond was delayed. The Mulan was delayed. The Black Widow was delayed. But in China, we have our own film to go forward. But nobody understands Chinese film, just like nobody understands Indian film, okay? So what I'm suggesting is that we must understand soft power and hard power. They are not separate issues, okay? They are one thing. They're related to each other. So I would suggest that when we examine the soft power of China, give them a little bit of time. If we have spent the last 40 years to build our economy, we might need another 40 years to let everybody understand how the Chinese soft power is. One thing that's clear, in the last 40 years, China did not invade anybody. China did not have a war with somebody that would grab their land, okay? So I think we need to wait a little bit to see that. And I have high confidence that China will express its soft power in the foreseeable future. That's how I would see it. I don't want to separate the two in such a way.
Okay, we have another 4 questions, but one of the questions by Yelena Muravyova, I think it is concerned with the situation if China wins the competition with the US. Maybe we should discuss this question if this happens. So this leaves us with the three remaining people who would like to ask questions. And I would like to give the floor to Natalia Karpova. Please. Very short question.
Dear Professor Yu, thank you so much for your really very inspiring presentation, full of logic, sense, and very positive emotions about China. I have a question. You see that we have a great misunderstanding or a lack of knowledge about such countries like China, sometimes about Russia and the United States and so on and so forth. Maybe it's a gap between the real picture of the world and our educational efforts to build up a picture for students or maybe young intellectuals and maybe not young intellectuals. And maybe it's a lack of industriosity from the side of experts all over the world to go in depth of international problems, international economy, and so on and so forth. When we read articles, modern articles about China in Europe and the United States, we are smiling. It's so superficial, full of cliches approach. What shall we do as representatives of educational sphere to overcome this gap and to make the future generations more enlightened in terms of the current and the future? That is one point.
Your question is clear.
Yes, yes. And maybe very short, another one. You represent an intellectual forces of China.
For other participants.
Very short. Do you perceive that this competition, this severe trade war between China just remarks a new digitalization epoch challenge? And China is pretending to be a winner in a new wave of technological change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't quite worry about the younger generation understanding each other. I do worry our generation because we are much older than them and we are much slower than them in absorbing knowledges. With the internet, with the world really intermingle a lot, the new generation are very aggressive in seeing things outside. And with general growth in economic and reduction of cost of traveling and communication, I don't quite worry the younger generation will be as dogmatic or as closed as our generation to be. Okay, that's my optimism towards the future generation. But I think it is very important that if more communication, more understanding of the outside world are provided, opportunities are provided, then I think the world will educate ourselves. Of course, in universities, I strongly advocate the opening of university for people from other places so that everybody can understand it better. And there's still a lot of war or conflicts today, like the one that's happening in Armenia and Azerbaijan, for example. And a lot of them are, I honestly think, is so unnecessary. But I think if there could be a lot more communication, dialogue among different kind of people, it will be easier. And if we use the internet in a more appropriate way, in a more open way, I'm pretty sure the younger generation will work a lot better than us in understanding the other people. I think the technology that China is putting forward, and just like what we have done, the Chinese government has done with the vaccines, okay, and which has declared that as a public good for the world. Now, I think we should all do that, especially when we have a hard time. The COVID is definitely a hard time. I think that if we could, all the countries, including Russia, China, Europe, is able to be a lot more inclusive in all this, especially during this hard time. I think it will help a lot in communicating that. I think China's technology program will definitely be an open program. I'm pretty sure if China could benefit from such a development, and just like in the case of the Belt and Road, and I'm pretty sure now China is doing a lot of business with Russia, and if the two countries can open up further to each other, I mean, the chance of China and Russia has certain kind of conflict, the chance is very, very low, okay? So I think that is the only way to solve this kind of problem.
Okay, we have the last two questions. Please ask them shortly. Sun Zhihao Tongxue.
Thank you. My question is the dual circulation, 双循环, development pattern has been recently mentioned by Xi Jinping. Its creation would be beneficial for economic development of China. Can we say that it's the changes in the relations between China and the US that stimulated such a decision, and China is trying to reduce US influence? Thank you.
I don't think the dual twin circulation is a strategy to counter the US trade war at all. I think first of all, you must understand, service sector has been expanding in the last 10 to 15 years in China. And if you look back in the USA, in Japan, in Europe also, and services or domestic consumption will always rise up after the export-driven economy expand. So domestic consumption is always the reason why people work so hard in manufacturing and export. Now, if you export, you earn the money. If you grow your economy, why you want to do that? Because you want to enhance your standard of living. You want to spend the money. The only reason you want to have a job is because you can have wages and then you can spend it. So China has been accumulating so much wealth in the last 40 years in an export-driven economy. The spending the money to improve the life will definitely be the next step. But at the same time, when you're doing export, you can improve your economy. When you're doing domestic consumption, you are also improving your economy if you manage it right, okay? So in the case of China, I'm sure everybody understands the domestic saving is very high in China, okay? So in an organized way, to release such saving and become an engine for domestic economic growth, why this is a problem at all? It should be like that. So as long as China do not overspend like the US now, and if that's the case, the economic growth will be driven by domestic consumption is the appropriate way to grow its economy in this second stage. So I don't think the twin circulation is anything at all counter the US. I'll give you one example. And 13, 14 years ago, when I was starting my cinema business in China, China's box office is less than Hong Kong, which is only 7 million people. China has 1.4 billion people. Now, my company's box office alone, which is only about 6% of China, is much bigger than Hong Kong as a whole already. So this roughly about 60 to 70 billion RMB box office will generate roughly about 100 billion US dollar economic activities in China. Now, this is what I call the services sector. When this thing goes on, it will, of course, grow the economy, and at the same time has a higher percentage of gross domestic product comparing with export. So I wouldn't say at all that the twin cycle circulation is in any way counter the US, other than it is the second step for the China to grow its economy and to create a better equilibrium within the Chinese economy, from agriculture, from the manufacturing, and also services, which mainly include a lot of domestic consumption. So this is how I would see it. So I think to put it as a countermeasure to the US trade war is not the appropriate way to understand it.
Okay, and now the last question from the user called Acer. He asks, could you elaborate about the presumed conditions in which you expect the United States to switch to a more cooperative approach to China? I think you already mentioned that when China's GDP will be 125% of American, but maybe you would like to elaborate a little bit on this.
I think the biggest comforting factor between China and USA is we can use time to let both sides understand each other. If we can hold on to a peaceful arrangement longer, that the American understand the Chinese politics better, that they don't see China as a threat, I think that is important. And with regard to that, if China's economy, based on how it's being developed now, it will be bigger than the USA in a few years' time. And when that happens, and when the China economy is bigger than the USA, more productive than the USA, I think both sides will be more calm in looking at each other. That's how I see it, okay? I think I also look at another factor is when the US dollar is not becoming so dominant, and the American understand they cannot use the printing of US dollar to mitigate its domestic economic problem. If they shift back and make their economy more productive, then I would imagine they will not, they don't have any chance to say that the other party has created a problem for America. So by that time, they will be more reasonable. They will not be as populistic as now. Then I think both sides could create a better understanding. When that comes, I think the two countries will be a lot more rational in treating each other. That's how I look at it. But before that happens, we are going to have some instability, and we need to learn how to manage that instability, okay, and not going into war.
I think this is a very good, a positive theme to finish our discussion. And because we all here wish China to fulfill its plans and to end the trade war so that the global situation will calm down. And I think that let me speak on behalf of everybody, we should thank Dr. Yu Pun-hoi for his vision and for his suggestions for China, for the United States, and for the whole world. And if there are some questions remaining, we should, anytime we are able to check the Doorway Xinwen news site, or we can check the Hong Kong 01 newspaper. That are the major news outlets run by Dr. Yu Pun-hoi. And we could, of course, learn a lot more about situation in China, in Hong Kong, and in the region. And with this, I would like to thank everybody, people who asked questions, people who shared their comments. Thank you, Professor Lukin, for organizing this event. And of course, thank you, Dr. Yu Pun-hoi, and we will be happy to continue our interaction in the future. Thank you very much, and thank everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.